Ursula versus Jafar, two of the most iconic villains in Disney's animation, and arguably two of the most wicked villains to grace the silver screen. But which one could be argued to be more evil? Both of them have vile motives, and both utilize despicable methods in the attainment of their malevolent objectives. For Ursula, her main driver is that of revenge against King Triton for banishing her out of the kingdom, forcing her to languish in less than desirable conditions as she awaits her next gullible victim. Out of this first motivation of revenge comes a secondary driver, that of ambitious greed, as revenge against Triton would necessitate her becoming more powerful than him to exact her vengeance. But to be fair, there would be some inkling of ambitious greed to begin with, as before her banishment she was already practicing dark magic, which is the reason for said banishment. As for Jafar, unlike Ursula, his driver is purely out of ambitious greed, wanting to ascend to the highest office of the land. Due to his personal insecurity and realizing that it's not sufficient to win the respect of his opponents, he ups the ante and uses his remaining two wishes for increasing levels of power. So starting off with their motivations alone, it's suggestible that Jafar's driver of greed comes off as morally worse than that of Ursula's. Of course, revenge is hardly a noble aspiration to have, but I submit that it comes off as a more natural reaction that any of us would be susceptible to. Also, let's consider their present circumstances. For Ursula, it's somewhat of a death sentence to be left stranded alone to fend for herself in the dark depths of the ocean without sunlight and natural sustenance. If Ursula is indeed Triton's sister, then she must have undergone such a drastic transformation in order to adapt to her new environment, where her hair has gone white and her skin has changed color to an eerily purple shade. Contrast this with Jafar, who is vizier to the Sultan, second in command in the land. He's already enjoying a significant amount of power and prestige, and has no reason as to why he needs to advance beyond his current position. It would therefore seem more understandable that Ursula would take measures to improve her living conditions rather than Jafar, who is already hip deep in luxury and should be content with where he is. So between the two of them, I'd say that Jafar's motivation comes off as more evil than Ursula's. But aside from that, let's take a look at their methods and activities. Both characters make use of shortcuts to fast track their quest for revenge or power. Ursula, for a lack of a better description, is a scammer and a con artist, luring poor, unfortunate souls into the net of her entrapment, preying on their insecurities and aspirations, to deceive them into a binding contract that has them put the highest price one can offer, that of their very souls. And if what we see with Ariel is any indication of her ethics, then we can assume that Ursula probably cheated on her other contracts as well so that she wouldn't have to hold up her end of the bargain. But beyond just being a cheat, Ursula's contracts also reveal another of her traits, namely a delight in the suffering of others. Acquiring the souls of her victims does nothing to improve her life, except for making a decorative trophy garden which appeals to her sadism. The cruelty of such a practice deserves a bit more emphasis. Being turned into a polyp is a fate worse than death, withering into a worm-like creature with no autonomy and no reason for existence other than serving as a reminder to others for the foolish decision you made with the sea witch. Jafar, on the other hand, fares a bit better morally in the area of his methods and activities. When he was granted to be the most powerful sorcerer in the world, he could have indulged in the same sadism as Ursula, turning his enemies into inferior creatures as trophies, but to his credit such an event did not occur. Now he most definitely did cheat in a sense too, in the fact that he deceived Aladdin into helping him acquire the lamp, and when he used magic to hypnotize the Sultan. But in comparison with Ursula, at least there was no agreed contract between Jafar and his victims. Now of course, morality dictates that we have a duty to treat others the way we want to be treated, and Jafar is certainly acting contrary to this principle. Ursula, however, is doing something more egregious in my opinion, and definitely more unfair, as she had a contractual agreement with Ariel, and nowhere was it disclosed that she could still cheat and get away scot-free. Looking at the crux of both the plans of Ursula and Jafar, Ariel was Ursula's ticket to the fast track of success, while for Jafar, it's the genie in his three wishes. For Jafar, however, it's somewhat more of a fair game with the use of the genie, Anyone has the right to use the genie if they acquire the lamp, and everyone is entitled to the same number of three wishes to use however they choose. So while Jafar is acting unfairly to his victims in a sense, it's suggestible that it's less of an extent, as with Ursula, who delves deeper into more malicious manipulation and exploitation with her victims. So, in light of her greater deception and her taking pleasure in the suffering of others, Ursula is the one who has more heinous actions in their respective films. But ultimately, when we come down to it, in my opinion, Jafar takes the cake as being the overall more evil of the two. The character trait that breaks the tie for me would be his unlimited and insatiable lust for power. At the height of her powers, Ursula had control of all the oceans and seas, a most appalling state for those living underwater, but it would seem that her goal was accomplished, her need for revenge satisfied. It would be a tyrannical reign, but nevertheless one that is confined to the limits of the ocean, and I can see Ursula simply spending the rest of her days comfortably indulging in the luxury of Triton's kingdom. Jafar, however, shows himself to be far more greedy, wanting to use his last wish to become an all powerful being, and in that brief moment before he realizes the old adage of being careful what you wish for, he celebrates in glee over the thought of commanding and controlling the entire universe. It's no far stretch to assume that Jafar would make every living being subservient to him, turning everyone's existence to be one marked by immense suffering and agony, billions of lives at the mercy of one man's excessive desire. But once again, Jafar's insecurity rears its ugly head, and due to a shrewd comparison made by Aladdin to the genie, Jafar taints his wish with one wrong word and becomes a prisoner to his own request. So, in comparing the two of them, I'd say that due to his main driver of greed and his unlimited desire for power, Jafar trumps Ursula in being the more evil of the two. But what do you think? Do you agree with how I weighed both characters? Let me know your thoughts and suggestions in the comments.